How did a leader with absolute power end up underground? His own bodyguard gave him up. In a 2-meter shaft, sealed beneath a thick layer of bricks, hid a man hunted by the most powerful military machine on the planet. He occupied exactly 1.5 square meters. No ventilation, no escape routes. Only the suffocating smell of damp earth and stale air trapped inside a narrow dirt trench. Troops dismantled the camouflage. Heavy gloves hurled the debris aside. A tactical flashlight beam sliced through the absolute blackness of the pit. The harsh glare struck an emaciated face. Tangled gray beard, sunken eyes. Operators reached into the dirt and hauled the skeletal figure out into the night. Steel handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. 600 elite soldiers, assault helicopters, and heavy armor mobilized for one man with a flashlight. Command launched Operation Red Dawn on December 13, 2003. The mechanized apparatus of the 4th Infantry Division and Task Force 121 locked down the Iraqi sector. Drones scanned thermal signatures. Satellites monitored the grid. A sprawling, multi-billion-dollar military network converged on a rural farmhouse to isolate a target hiding 6 to 8 feet deep. The ultimate asymmetry of modern warfare. Absolute technological supremacy focused on a primitive, underground anomaly. Down in the spider hole, the deposed president abandoned a loaded pistol he never fired. Beside the weapon sat a dirty nylon sack. Inside the bag lay his final remaining asset, $750,000. The man who finally surrendered the coordinates of that dirt hole was just the last broken link. For 8 months, military intelligence tightened a snare around his hometown. Baghdad fell on April 9, 2003. The dictator vanished. The hunt began. CIA agents and army interrogators did not rely on blind luck. They built a human grid. They captured loyalists. They broke couriers. Every arrest generated names. Every name exposed a new safe house. An 8-month operation required the daily analysis of hundreds of interrogations. The data stripped away the vast Iraqi desert. Analysts narrowed a massive country down to a few square kilometers. The search grid collapsed onto the Salah al-Din province. Specifically, the dense agricultural zones hugging the banks of the Tigris River. The fugitive moved constantly. He survived on a fading network of local loyalists. But the intelligence machine mapped his every step. The geographic circle closed. Strike teams isolated the final coordinates. American armor and infantry units deployed and locked down the perimeters around the towns of Ad-Dar, Samarra, and Tikrit. The dirt hole was only a temporary extraction point. Armed escorts moved the captive directly into the concrete perimeter of Camp Cropper. The former president ceased to exist. He officially became high-value detainee number 1. Why did the military keep the light on 24 hours a day? It eliminated any physical possibility of hiding from the cameras. Protocol demanded absolute optical dominance over the human body. The architecture of the cell completely excluded privacy. 6 by 9 feet of blank concrete. A heavy fluorescent fixture buzzed behind a safety grate. He could not turn off the bulb under the ceiling. Blinding white glare burned his eyes without pause. He moved in a tight sequence, from the bolted metal bed to a small steel sink. The system dismantled his psychological defenses through a continuous deprivation of physical space and natural darkness. Guards watched the surveillance feeds. The prisoner sat in silence. No dialogue. No visual contact with other inmates. The strict daily schedule offered a single release, 1 hour a day. Escorts walked him into a tiny walled yard. Camera lenses tracked his movements from above. He paced the concrete perimeter to maintain muscle tone. He breathed the dusty air. Then the heavy door locked him back inside the permanent daylight. He spent hours writing. Couriers carried his letters to his daughters in Jordan. He sat on the thin mattress. He read the Quran alone. Camp Cropper's lenses tracked his physical movements, but across the interrogation table, a different extraction protocol was underway. In 2004, FBI agent George Pirro launched a months-long psychological operation to dismantle the dictator. Daily verbal combat, no physical force, just methodical probing. Saddam dictated the pace of the conversations. He projected absolute calm. He still played the untouchable president. Outside the isolation cell, his status shifted. The military trophy had to become a formal defendant. On June 28, 2004, coalition officials signed the transfer documents. The United States handed legal custody over to the Iraqi interim government. Prime Minister Ayad Allawi assumed official jurisdiction. The coalition dismantled the old system. Baghdad took the gavel. But this handover provided a perfect illusion of sovereignty. The transition functioned strictly on paper. Baghdad's newly formed security apparatus lacked the tactical resources to hold the nation's prime target. Legally, the prisoner belonged to the Iraqi justice system. Physically, he slept under the barrels of American assault rifles. United States Military Command maintained full perimeter control due to high-threat intelligence regarding a potential jailbreak. This exact threat of an armed breakout forced the coalition to accelerate. After 2 years of total isolation, the legal mechanism sparked to life inside the blast walls of Baghdad's Green Zone. On October 19, 2005, the Iraqi Special Tribunal commenced. Exactly what charges did the tribunal bring against the dictator at the first hearing? The systemic liquidation of 148 residents of a single town. The timeline shifted back to 1982. A presidential convoy moved through Dujail, 60 kilometers north of Baghdad. Dawa Party militants ambushed the motorcade. Gunfire struck the armor. The ruler survived. But the private assassination attempt triggered a disproportionate state response. Retaliation became a military operation. Barzan Ibrahim al-Takriti took command. As head of intelligence, the dictator's half-brother turned the security apparatus into a meat grinder. Agents locked down the perimeter. They arrested hundreds of locals, elderly men, young boys. Evidence meant nothing. The judicial machine simply stamped 148 death sentences, a quota for the gallows. The punishment consumed the entire geography of the rebellion. Guards packed the surviving families into military transport, sending them to the torture cells of Abu Ghraib prison. Behind them, the heavy metallic clanking of bulldozer tracks echoed through the streets. Steel blades tore up ancient agricultural lands. Engineering units systematically flattened the remaining houses and orchards into dirt. On the night of December 29, the man who destroyed Dujail sat in the absolute silence of an American military prison block. He wrote his final testament inside Camp Cropper. What did a dictator who controlled the nation for 24 years ask for on his last night? A simple Islamic burial. A pen scratched across standard paper. The 69-year-old inmate folded the page. He handed the sheet to his defense attorney. This single letter holding his last will remained his only valid document. The state had nullified everything else. The penal system smoothly processed the former president into a standard death row item. The protocol compressed all human emotion into dry bureaucratic lines. He specified a grave location in Al-Auja, his native village. He demanded a spot directly next to Uday and Qusay. American assault teams had eliminated both his sons 3 years prior. His jurisdiction shrank to zero. For 2 decades, he had commanded vast mechanized armies. He dictated the daily survival of 35 million citizens. Now he faced the absolute mechanical limit of his power. Legally, he controlled nothing but a narrow patch of dirt next to his dead children. Outside the concrete walls, the state machine shifted gears. Iraqi officials signed the execution warrants. They began the final logistical preparations to transport the prisoner. Processing a 69-year-old dictator into a solitary cell required a relentless judicial assembly line. Cameras pinned him inside a narrow wooden dock, a captive in a box. Yet, he still demanded absolute authority as the ruling president of Iraq. The courtroom functioned as a mechanical trap. It operated strictly during the American occupation period. The new state machinery needed a public dismantling of the former ruler. Prosecutors fed the tribunal its primary charge. The Dujail massacre. Mass killings of civilians. Authorities dragged 7 other officials into the same legal crosshairs. The list included Barzan al-Takriti and former Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan. The system intended to process them logically and quietly. Hussein broke the gears from the inside. He systematically denied the court's jurisdiction. He stood up, interrupted the magistrates, and branded them traitors. This was no longer a standard trial. It became a live collision of 2 competing legitimacies. Hussein weaponized the televised feed to dismantle the legal framework. His formal defense strategy rested on a single aggressive claim. He justified the massacre as a lawful state execution of terrorists. The rhetoric of state defense, echoing from the wooden pen, shattered against dry evidence. What became the prosecution's ultimate weapon? Ink. Black ink on official state stationery. The trial mechanism demanded strict control. The first chief judge, Rizgar Mohammed Amin, resigned under immense political pressure. His replacement, Rauf Abdel Rahman, tightened the grip. He turned the chaotic courtroom into a rigid legal conveyor. Survivors from Dujail testified. They detailed systematic torture. They described lost families. But human grief did not seal the verdict. Prosecutors projected execution orders onto the courtroom monitors. Pages of administrative decrees flashed across the screens. At the bottom of each document sat a single stroke of a pen, Saddam Hussein's personal signature. That ink authorized the deaths of 148 men and boys. A bureaucratic routine, a formal stamp. Now, that exact paperwork built his gallows. On November 5, 2006, the machine delivered its output. The tribunal found the former ruler guilty of crimes against humanity. The sentence dictated death by hanging. The defendant refused to break. He stood up. He raised his right fist into the air. He shouted that he did not fear execution. He still claimed the title of absolute leader. But the legal clock ignored political defiance. His defense team immediately filed an appeal. They expected a long bureaucratic delay. The state moved faster. The Iraqi appeals court reviewed the massive trial record in absolute overdrive. Between the initial verdict and the final denial, exactly 7 weeks passed. An unprecedented speed for a state tribunal. The court confirmed the hanging. All legal loopholes closed on December 26th. Once the verdict was sealed on December 26th, a legal timer started ticking. 30 days. Iraqi law granted that exact window to carry out a death sentence. But the state zeroed the countdown. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki ordered an immediate bureaucratic acceleration. The new regime compressed the legal timeframe to meet a strict political deadline. Eid al-Adha was approaching. Depending on the moon, the major Islamic holiday would begin on December 31st or January 1st. For Maliki's Shia-dominated government, executing the former Sunni leader before the sacred festival served as a calculated strike. It demonstrated absolute domination. The fallen dictator had to swing before the holiday prayers began. The execution morphed into a high-speed logistical operation. Clerks drafted and stamped the final warrants in hours. Officials hastily assembled the hanging squad. Authorities dispatched urgent summons to judges and mandatory witnesses. Behind secure walls, Iraqi leaders and American military commanders synchronized the rapid transfer protocol. Guards delivered the news to the prisoner. He knew death was coming. Once officials assembled the execution team, the state faced a logistical problem. How do you legally process a death? You transfer the object. At exactly 3 in the morning on December 30, 2006, commanders finalized the paperwork. The United States military signed a Physical Custody Act, standard protocol, ink on a standard form. With that single stroke, Washington officially washed its hands of the dictator's life. The prisoner lost his international status. He became Iraqi state property. This signature triggered the transport phase. Heavy armor cut through the night. Diesel engines roared. A massive tactical convoy transported the asset across the dark Kadamiyya district. The vehicle stopped at a heavily guarded Ministry of Justice facility. The state chose this exact location on purpose. Decades prior, this concrete complex operated as the headquarters for Saddam's own military intelligence. The new regime brought the ruler to his own interrogation center to destroy him. Inside, the mechanics of elimination stood ready. A heavy wooden platform and a tightly braided noose waited under the harsh lights. The execution chamber filled with selected witnesses. Magistrates observed the procedure. Clerics watched in silence. Executioners gripped the ropes. But the new government reserved the front row for civilians. Standing directly before the gallows were men who had lost their families during the Dujail massacre. At exactly 6 in the morning, gravity and a calibrated rope ended an era. The dictator's cervical vertebrae snapped in a fraction of a second. How much time does it take to dismantle a dictator's power? Exactly as long as a body falls before the rope jerks. The steel trapdoor slammed open. The body plummeted through the floor, free fall, then a brutal, sudden stop. A dull snap of breaking bone cut through the execution chamber. This was not a chaotic killing, it was applied biomechanics. Executioners calculated the drop using standard military drop tables. They matched his exact body weight against the required freefall distance. The mathematical formula guaranteed an immediate, massive fracture of the neck. No slow asphyxiation, just kinetic energy tearing a human spine apart. The corpse dangled in the shaft for several minutes. The state required absolute proof of biological failure. Iraqi doctors approached the suspended figure. They checked the carotid artery. They examined the eyes. Medical staff officially logged the time of clinical death. The new government moved instantly to dispose of the regime's physical remains. Fast forward to December 31st. Security forces bypassed standard transport routes and loaded the coffin onto a military helicopter. The aircraft flew the remains directly to the remote village of Al-Auja. Tribal leaders placed the body into a simple tomb inside a local mosque. But 10 minutes before the drop into the hatch, Baghdad's strict execution protocol suffered a critical failure. The state designed a sterile legal procedure, a flawless machine of justice. Instead, human vengeance hijacked the system. Saddam wore a white shirt and a heavy dark overcoat. Guards bound his wrists tightly behind his back. He began the climb. 13 steps. With every upward movement, the rough fabric of the coat rustled sharply against his tied hands. The official manual dictated a blindfold. The hangman presented the standard black hood. Saddam refused. He chose to face the rope with open eyes. The physical mechanics of death stood ready, but the control of the room failed. The sterile environment collapsed into chaos. Guards and witnesses broke discipline and started screaming. They chanted the name of Muqtada al-Sadr. They demanded blood for the murdered victims of Dujail. The formal state tribunal dissolved into a sectarian mob. Saddam stood on the wooden platform. The executioner tightened the thick noose. The condemned man looked down at the shouting crowd and reminded them of the law. They answered with curses. The official script vanished. Saddam ignored the noise. He began the final Islamic declaration of faith. He spoke the first line clearly. He started the second line, and the steel trapdoor violently swung open beneath his feet. A smuggled lens captured the chaos at the base of the 13 steps. The raw recording did not stay in that dark execution chamber. It hit the internet. How did one pixelated video break the state machine? It showed the world not a legal protocol, but a sectarian reprisal. The year was 2006. Camera phones just entered the mass market. Yet this low-resolution clip instantly became the first viral political snuff video of the digital age. Government channels desperately pushed a sterile narrative. Officials broadcast muted, carefully cropped footage. They wanted to project cold, dignified justice. The leaked digital file shattered that illusion on impact. Raw frames exposed the bitter reality under the swinging rope. Guards screaming political slogans, spiteful chants, mockery, laughter. The data leak bypassed all state censors. A single upload erased 3 years of meticulous tribunal hearings. The United Nations forcefully condemned the unhinged procedure. Major human rights groups stripped the event of its legal authority. They labeled the hanging a raw revenge killing. A multi-million-dollar legal apparatus completely collapsed under the weight of a shaky phone recording. The government lost total control of its own history. The gap between the physical drop and the global informational breach measured exactly 2 hours. Those leaked pixelated frames from Baghdad split the state wide open. Kurds celebrated the drop. Lawyers logged the flaws. The new government engineered the execution to anchor a unified country. Instead, the rope acted as a wedge. News networks looped the raw footage endlessly. Audiences watched the tightening of the noose on repeat. For Shia and Kurdish families, that visual cycle delivered absolute closure. They finally saw the physical end of the man who authored their decades of pain. But the legal mechanism misfired. Critics analyzed the exact same broadcast and saw a broken protocol. The tribunal moved fast. Judges handed down the ultimate verdict after just 1 year of hearings. This accelerated timeline stripped the process of judicial dignity. The midnight taunts under the gallows transformed a sterile court victory into loud sectarian revenge. The event resembled a hurried purge. The cell phone camera shattered the official diplomatic narrative. Observers audited the entire tribunal framework. International lawyers and human rights groups concluded that the trial failed to meet basic global legal standards. To decode the backlash against the tribunal, one must digitize the regime's raw statistics. The historical body count required 7 digits. 1 million dead in a single war. 5,000 asphyxiated in a single town. What was the mathematics of stability under Saddam? The equation was absolute. 1 million lives buried in border trenches, and thousands suffocating from airborne chemical agents. The Iran-Iraq War ground on from 1980 to 1988. The front lines consumed 1 million human beings. That exact casualty metric matches the sudden, complete annihilation of a major European metropolis. Every street empty. No survivors. Against this massive industrial scale, the 1982 Dujail massacre registered as a minor administrative action. But the internal violence constantly evolved. March 1988. The Kurdish town of Halabja became a tactical testing ground. Attack jets breached the lower airspace. Bombs detached from the pylons and shattered against the pavement. A heavy chemical fog crept through the dense residential blocks. Survivors recalled one distinct sensory detail before their nervous systems short-circuited. The vapor smelled like sweet apples. It was weapons-grade mustard gas. Lungs dissolved. Muscles paralyzed. 5,000 civilians died exactly where they stood. The terror apparatus required constant external momentum. In 1990, Iraqi armored columns crossed the southern border and invaded Kuwait. Eliminating the architect of the gas attacks in 2006 did not close the death toll. It tore open a massive geopolitical vacuum. The Sunni vertical of power collapsed. The coalition dismantled the Ba'athist state apparatus overnight. Shia factions seized total control. The new administration purged Sunnis from the military. Officers lost their ranks. They lost their salaries. Unemployed, hunted, heavily armed. Tens of thousands of former commanders went underground. They needed a new operational base. They found it inside Camp Bucca. Behind the barbed wire of this detention facility, a fatal merger occurred. Secular military engineers of the old regime shared cells with religious extremists. The dictator's intelligence network fused seamlessly with radical ideology. Sectarian violence shattered the country. Sunnis slaughtered Shias. Car bombs erased entire city blocks. Al-Qaeda in Iraq weaponized this structural collapse. They tested urban tactics. They adapted. Then came the critical mutation. Amidst the absolute chaos, the network shifted from scattered guerrilla cells into a highly organized administrative proto-state. Al-Qaeda evolved into ISIS. The new terror machine recalibrated. Black flags rose over the smoldering concrete ruins of Iraqi cities. The wind carried the heavy stench of dust and burning oil. the caliphate stepped directly into the institutional void. Its tactical units captured vast territories across Iraq and Syria. The absolute peak of this systematic destruction spanned from 2014 to 2017.